If you ask people, how did the Earth come into being? What began it? Well, some will say the Earth and everything else, the whole universe, everything was created by God. And he did it in 6 days, some 6,000 years ago. They may even be quite precise about that, pinning it down right to the very minute of creation. And they'll quote John Ussher, the Church of Ireland Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland, who lived between 1581 and 1656, and he put a lot of thought into that question. He studied old texts and he made timelines, and he came to the conclusion that the Earth was created at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd of October, 4004 BC, which would make it now, 6,024 years old. Yes, one of the angels must have had a stopwatch. Others, of course, will say the Earth came into being about 4.5 billion years ago. Well, give or take 50 million years or so either way. What's a few million years between friends? After the initial creation of the universe some 14 billion years ago, following the Big Bang. Now, unfortunately, they can't give you the time or date of that event. I'm sorry. So, either God waved his hand and everything just went poof, and there it was, or it gradually evolved over rather a long time. Now, in the case of the Earth, we know the Sun came first, beginning as an interstellar cloud of hydrogen gas and dust, gravitationally contracting until it was dense enough for thermonuclear reactions to begin. When it reached 10 million degrees Celsius, it lit up, so to speak, becoming a new, young, brilliant, blue-white star surrounded by an accretion disk of material. And that disk itself then contracted and solidified into the planets of the solar system, including, of course, this one, the Earth. So, you have those two theories of creation, the poof theory, or gravitational contraction following the Big Bang theory. One of those theories explained in very great and utterly incomprehensible detail in Genesis in the Old Testament, and the other explained by science. Now, I find the polar positions of those who claim that Genesis is totally right, the creationists, and those who claim it's totally wrong, the evolutionists, as rather strange, at least as to how those opposing views relate to the question of who or what was responsible for it, God or simple evolution of everything from the Big Bang. One side saying it was totally God, and the other saying, well, it totally wasn't. Dedicated creationists would say, well, evolution doesn't explain it. And if you believe in evolution, well, that gets rid of God. If everything just happened, well, there's no place in it for God. But they say creation was so complicated, God must exist since, well, it couldn't all have created itself. While equally dedicated evolutionists will say, well, poofing things into existence, that's just plain stupid. It defies all the laws of everything. You can't make something out of nothing. Everything that is made or ever has been made, it is made or has been made from something else that existed previously. Even the Big Bang itself was some kind of conversion of one state of matter to another. The singularity, as it's called, obviously already existed, or, well, it couldn't have produced the Big Bang, though we have no idea of the physics of that pre-existing state of the universe, since our laws of physics were created by the Big Bang itself. And as to God, well, they would say he probably doesn't exist anyway, so he couldn't really prove anything. There's seemingly no common ground between them, other than the fact that everything was obviously created, and they both agree on that, since they really have no choice, given the fact that, well, we're here. Now, a little bit of logic. I really hate to bring logic into religion, but anyway, logic really dictates that both sides in that argument actually have a common ground. Yes, they do, if they really want to look for it. Firstly, evolution equals no God. Strictly speaking, that's not correct. You know, that is using a scientific fact to attempt to establish an unscientific conclusion based on no proper scientific evidence, since the evidence to support it is impossible to get, and therefore you cannot reach the conclusion. That you see what I mean. Evolution as such does not get rid of God. You know, scientists don't say God doesn't exist. They can't. They can't say there is no God. Because under the basic rules of science, if they do that, they have to prove it, and they can't. Just as those who say God does exist can't prove that either. They may believe he exists, but they can't prove it. You know, you can't prove or disprove something that can't be put under a microscope, analyzed in a test tube, its spectrum or DNA identified, or its existence observed and confirmed by any other method. Basically, you will be trying to prove or disprove something that by our observational capabilities, well, it isn't there. To prove or disprove the existence of nothing in the physical sense. But being a creationist does not mean that you must totally dismiss evolution in any form. You know, even the Roman Catholic Church does now acknowledge the concept. Well, yeah, sort of at least. Nor does being an evolutionist require anyone to totally dismiss the divine creation theory, unless they are also an atheist, which I'll come to in a moment. Now, both camps can be reconciled, unlikely though that might seem. I'm sure you're scratching your head at the moment saying, where is this guy going with this thing? But so bear with me. Bear with me on that one. Now, there is one big difference between the 2 points of view. Evolution is not only scientifically provable, but also proven. The Big Bang, you know, it is an indisputable fact, the age of rocks, the fossil record. There is a mountain of solid proof to support it. While creation by intelligent design is, by its very nature, unprovable. And it is unproven. It is based solely on faith. And that faith often stems from equally unprovable sources, such as Genesis in the Old Testament, a document that relies solely on one's uncritical acceptance of it with no supporting evidence. That is really the very definition of faith. It can and will be argued that since faith cannot be disproven by any means known to science, that thus it cannot be said not to exist. Which, of course, is a fair point. While the counter-argument would be that while creation by design cannot be disproven, but would in any case be impossible by any natural law, then creation by evolution is thus the correct version by default, which is also a fair point. So which, on the face of it, is more credible? Poof or bang? Now, I have to say that we know how the universe was created. And we know how the earth was created. And I'm sorry, Archbishop Usher, it didn't happen in just 1 week, a few thousand years ago. So why does the Old Testament go into such detail describing the way it didn't happen? Well, there's a very simple reason for that, a reason that really can't be questioned. The writers of the Bible had no scientific knowledge. That is quite obvious from what they wrote. They could only go by what they saw around them, and they had no ideas of what most of that actually was. The sun, the moon, the stars, what caused day and night, earthquakes, volcanoes, what a rainbow was. Amazing things that seemed almost magical. And they tried to come up with explanations for those things, explanations which, through no fault of theirs, were completely wrong. Which in itself, when you think about it, proves that God did not dictate a word of Genesis. No, he couldn't have. Because if he had created all those things, he would know what they actually were. You know, he would know when he had created them. Unless, of course, you think God came down with a case of amnesia. So if the Bible is the true and unalterable word of God dictated by him to those who wrote it down, it should be scientifically correct in every detail. He would hardly tell them things he knew were incorrect. Why would he do that? You know. But Genesis isn't correct. It is completely wrong in almost every detail. It is so wrong, in fact, that it becomes quite laughable. There are so many tools that enable us to know what things on the earth and across the universe are and how old those things are. I mean, we have spectral analysis, redshift, ice cores, carbon-14 dating, sedimentary deposits, and radiometric dating from isotopes, among other things. So if everything on Earth and across the universe was only a few thousand years old, the evidence of it, it would be glaringly obvious. It would be so recent and fresh it couldn't be missed, even if it was a bit older. Well, uranium and thorium dating has a range of several 100,000 years, for example, so it and other scientific applications would easily detect the fallacy of Archbishop Usher's ridiculous idea of the age of the Earth. So one must logically say creation by evolution wins. But, you may ask, how then can the God created it side ever be reconciled with the God had nothing to do with it side? Since on the face of it, the question of creation itself is not really the issue. Both sides accept a creation of some kind. They have no choice but to agree on that. But the existence or non-existence of God and his involvement or lack of involvement in it is the basic question dividing the two camps. And what I've just said leaves God, well, pretty much out in the cold. But is that absolutely the case if you're a person of faith? You believe in God and you still want to believe in creation by design. But, you can't really deny the evidence without looking like a total idiot. Well, you have a get-out-of-jail card. Oh, yes. As I said, neither argument for God can actually be proven, but that is completely unimportant, since the total wrongness of Genesis, or pretty much the whole of the Old Testament for that matter, has nothing to do with the existence or not of God. It's irrelevant to his existence, or indeed non-existence. If you go by the scientific explanation of creation and subsequent evolution, that does not prove God doesn't exist. And sensible scientists don't claim it does. They will say, well, God may exist. That's possible. Just the fact that he didn't create everything the way Genesis says he did, it no way means that he doesn't exist. It just means that he didn't poof everything into existence. And, that is, I think, quite a sensible way of looking at it. But if you believe that God personally created all things in heaven and earth, well, you can still believe that. And you can accept the science of evolution at the same time. How can you do that, you might ask? Think about it. Couldn't the Big Bang, which we can prove did happen, there is no question about that, couldn't that be how God did it? He was the Big Bang. He set it off and then let everything evolve from that. And the science and faith can come together if you really want them to. After all, wouldn't the Big Bang be a pretty big sort of miracle in itself? You could still have your divine creation of everything, but in a scientific manner. Since if you say God created everything, then he created the laws of physics, and poofing things into existence isn't one of them, so why would he break his own laws? Of course, that does rather spoil our idea of the human race as something special, something created to rule over all creatures, to lord it over everything else, as we have done so ruthlessly for centuries. But if you still want to hold on to that religious idea of us, well, you can still say, well, that was God's plan all along, only it just had to wait a few billion years. It would certainly make more sense than Genesis in the Old Testament, since that makes no sense at all. And evolutionists could accept the idea of God creating the universe if they wanted to, without actually harming their theory in the slightest, if they take the Big Bang itself as God's handiwork. In which case the theory of billions of years of subsequent evolution still holds good, and science and religion could agree on something for a change. How about that? Now, that might not apply, of course, to a committed atheist, who would be fundamentally opposed to any notion of God doing anything at all, be it poofing or setting off the Big Bang, since that would require accepting the possibility of God's existence, which an atheist would hardly want to do. But many Christians who do believe in God have a greater faith in science and do not subscribe to the creationist position. They go with the Big Bang. So for them, well, they can have it both ways. Divine creation meets the Big Bang, you might say. While God's role in either scenario is, of course, still unprovable, the Bible itself is provably wrong. on so many levels: historical, archaeological, scientific, common sense, and often just plain logic. Genesis is more akin to Hans Christian Andersen or the Brothers Grimm than it is to any kind of fact. But again, if you are a believer, that does not say God doesn't exist, or that he, or perhaps we should say he, she, or it, since a spiritual being, hardly has a sex, unless there is also a goddess somewhere to go along with him. A being possessing one sex, logically implying something must also exist of the opposite sex. It doesn't imply that they, shall we say, weren't responsible for creation. I can't say God exists. I can't say God doesn't exist, because either opinion, either opinion requires a proof that is completely impossible. But I can say that trotting out the Bible as proof of God's existence can be challenged, to put it mildly. And for those who say that it is the undisputed Word of God, dictated by him to those who wrote it down, and therefore everything in it is correct down to the last detail, there is a very simple answer. In that case, if even one thing in it can be shown to be wrong, then that claim sinks without trace. And as I've said, the Bible is provably wrong. It has more holes in it than a Swiss cheese. You can't say, oh, well, that bit is wrong. Yes, that bit is wrong. But everything else is perfectly true. No. If one thing is wrong, then how do you know what other things may also be wrong? Even if you say, well, that bit is probably added later by someone. Yes. That bit, it didn't come from God. Oh, fair enough. But then, what else may have been added, altered, or omitted? And if God wanted his truth known to all, why would he give us a totally wrong version of his own creation to begin with, and then allow others to make changes to it? Which bits are correct, and which ones aren't? Of course, that is actually a very easy question in the case of Genesis. Which bits are wrong? Well, pretty much all of them. And the errors in Genesis, never mind the rest of the Old Testament, they are so glaringly obvious and dreadfully far from even the slightest suggestion of fact that they cannot be entertained even for a moment. Sit back and read Genesis carefully, with your eyes open and your brain switched on. And unless you have the IQ of a hamster, the inaccuracy of it should be obvious. Now, I've no desire to offend anyone, so I have to stress once again that in no way does any of this deny the existence of God. It just means he didn't write the book. Human fallibility did. People who knew nothing trying to make sense of something beyond their comprehension. They knew even less than Jon Snow. Just not their fault. But, as I hope I've established, if you are a believer in creation or in evolution, the idea that God, if there is one, be he, she, or it, could still be responsible either way is completely valid. Neither of you can prove it, of course, but equally, neither of you can disprove it. Your faith in God or your faith in science remains unchanged. So, if creationists want to keep their theory, they can easily do so. Just realize that God didn't do it at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd of October, 6,024 years ago. If he did create everything, he did it billions of years ago with the Big Bang, which, if you think about it, that would still make everything in the universe his creation, wouldn't it? So, from your point of view, nothing changes. Nothing changes but the timeline. And if you're an evolutionist, well, again, nothing changes. Your beliefs are still exactly the same, with or without divine planning. So what's the problem? Can't you just agree that creation happened in the way we can prove it happened with the Big Bang and evolution? One side accepting evolution for its own sake, with or without God, and the other accepting evolution itself as the creative work of God. And relegate the Old Testament to its rightful place as a not particularly nice semi-historical fantasy, a sort of biblical Game of Thrones. As I said, God may exist, he may not. You may believe in him, you may not believe in him. But either way, creation happened. Both sides agree on that. So why not just agree that either he did or he didn't? You have a 50-50 chance of being right either way. And just stop fighting over it, since it's an argument neither of you can win, And you'll only annoy yourself and others and end up with an ulcer worrying about it. So, with that, I shall say goodbye for now.